beyond COP30, translating policies into action for climate and environmental justice. So to join me on the stage, please welcome Timothy Ogenyi. Timothy, all right, so I'm not sure he's here yet. To join me again, my second panelist for today is Adeolu Adekola from the Center for Investigative Journalism, London. Oh, okay. Please, can you clap more for him? He's the one bankrolling me. All right, to join these gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Gideon Pesa from Ghana. He's a climate change expert. And the last panelist to join us on stage is Dr. Mike Terunga, the Executive Director, Global Initiative for Food Security and Ecosystem Preservation. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on stage this morning. So just a bit of context on why we're having this conversation today. Every year, we go to COP, we gather there to have conversations to discuss pressing challenges on climate change and how it affects us as a people and how it affects us, it shapes our lives, our economies, and the future of Africa. Now, at COP every year, there are commitments being made. We have negotiations being made every year. There are declarations being issued. And most importantly, every year we have global leaders committing or supporting to the cause of climate change. Now, every year, why we have these negotiations and conversations, the question is, what does this mean for the vulnerable communities? What does this mean for our local communities in Africa who are affected by extreme weather conditions, who are impacted by the impact of climate change, environmental degradations, and the widening climate change injustices? Now, the just concluded climate COP30 in Brazil. Again, commitments were being made, right? There are renegotiations, and then there are promises to strengthen the nationally determined contributions. And there are also conversations around climate finance and adaptation. Now, why the real challenge is not just in the commitments or the negotiations. It is actually in translating these commitments, these policies into concrete actions. So today, gentlemen, you will be sharing insights on all of these conversations. And I will flow from here to have my first conversation to Timothy. Now, we just concluded COP30 without a mention of fossil fuel. And we all know that there's a conversation on climate change in the first place because of the impact of fossil fuel on greenhouse gas. Now, what are the implications of this for us as a continent, particularly in Africa, and how do we respond strategically to mitigate climate risk?
Thank you. It's a missed opportunity. However, there are gains from it. Not mentioning extractive, fully explicit phase out of fossil fuel as an outcome of COP30. Yes, as I said, looks like a missed opportunity, but it brings home the need for the just transition mechanism that was also adopted and pushed forward by not just the African group of negotiators, but other developing countries. So the fact that explicit phase out of fossil fuel, which we also, as Africans, believe the need for just transition should be strengthened, because we know the dual role that fossil fuel play in terms of energy availability. We can't entirely push that narrative of explicit, complete phase out of fossil fuel because of our energy dependence on fossil fuel as a nation, for example, in line with other African countries, especially in the West Africa. However, the framework that needs to be developed, strengthened, is this just transition mechanism. So that's what I'm saying. We may not need to cry over the split milk by saying why, the end of COP30, this outcome does not include this phase out of fossil fuel again, and then, go over it and mourn over it and all that. Yes, it's a missed opportunity. However, I want to repeat, for the fact that adaptation finance was pushed, for the fact that just transition mechanism was highly pushed, strengthened, is something we should rely on. And, come back to the drawing board. This just transition, which provides the mechanisms for us to begin to think of energy transition, but in a fair, inclusive manner, to push our agenda of energy access, energy availability, and yet providing solution to the climate impact we face. So it's something we can also build on, looking at the opportunities it presents.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Now, you talked about pushing our agenda on energy transition. And then I'll now flow from that conversation to Adielu. Now, when it comes to communicating all of these issues, and even the outcome at COP to the general citizens, we know the media has that huge role to play. So in your opinion, how can African media frame climate justice issues to highlight the inequalities while pushing for accountability from leaders?
Thank you very much, Felicia. And Timothy has set a very interesting background, which I'm going to build up on. And I mean, we are at the Media and Development Conference, and there is a need the media more or less is like the core of the conversations that we are having today. Because we've said it time and time again that one of the major roles of the media is holding the power to account, right? And I mean, from the conversations yesterday, Mr. Idris Akibajo also spoke about how the media has to be accurate, has to be ethical, and so on and so forth. And all these things are part of what the media should be doing more of. And it's kind of like also informed the kind of intervention that we implemented at the Open Climate Reporting Initiative at the Center for Investigative Journalism. It's an initiative that we started in 2022 in implementing, and we've been able to work with journalists in about 58 countries, and we've had the privilege of working with CIJ in Nigeria and other West African countries. And this is the context. It's important that citizens and people understand what climate change is. Now, from what Timothy has said, when we are talking about, fossil fuel reduction and all those stuff, it then becomes, how do we balance it? We need the fossil fuel. It's our mainstay of the resources that we have. However, there is the responsibility that has come with what has happened with climate change. And if we have been paying attention, it is not just about the greenhouse gas emissions caused by fossil fuels that is being emitted now. It's a cumulative of what has happened from previous years. And that's why, for example, sometime last year, no, not last year, in 2023, just before the elections, and I'll use this as a case study. For me, personally, the 2023 elections was the first time climate change was going to be making it into political debate, so to speak. And there was a question that was thrown to the president currently, and it was on things around, what are your plans for climate change and so all that. And who here can remember his response? He said, how do you prevent a church rat from accessing a poisoned Holy Communion? End of quote. That was what he said. And the narrative was that as developing countries, we need to get the developed countries or the global north countries to pay for their greenhouse gas emissions over the years. But this was what was funny for me. after that comment was made by the then, president who was campaigning, the media ran with a narrative of church rats and Holy Communion. That was what the media ran with. The president of Cannes said, why would a candidate desecrate the Holy Communion of the church? And everything just got charged and sentimental, and it was around religion. For me, that was a completely missed opportunity by the media to engage audiences about how relying on the global north to pay is a weak strategy to mitigate and adapt to the consequences of climate change. And that's the fact. We can continue to drill our oil for all we care, and I'm an advocate for it because, 53 countries in Africa account for about 4% of global emissions. If we really want to reduce global emissions, you have to look at the top 6 or 7 global emitters that emit about 60 to 70%. So really, we know where to look at when we want to reduce global emissions: the US, Russia, China, India, and so on and so forth. So until these countries actually are responsible and are held responsible, we won't reduce the emissions. However, if we are relying on only getting them to reduce emissions, that's a weak strategy, because just in June, due to rainfall, excessive rainfall in Niger State, 200 people died. And my question is, what is the value of a Nigerian life? What value do we place when we don't respond, when we don't mitigate, when we don't adapt to some of these things? So I think the media has to go from being reactive to being proactive to engage the different issues. And like they said, not just the triggers, not just the flooding, what is causing the flooding. At COP30, for example, part of what was pushed by the Council, the National Council for Climate Change, is from the recently submitted NDCs. Now, NDCs are nationally determined contribution. They are documents that are submitted to the United Nations at every interval. Nigeria has submitted another one, the 3rd version, this year. And one of the targets that caught my eye in that document is that by 2030, I think, 2030 or 2035, Nigeria is projecting 100% access to electricity. How is that going to happen? I think that's the question the media should be asking. Thank you.
Thank you so much. But I'm still going to stay on you, just to ask like a follow-up question from all that you've said. Now, do you think media miss this opportunity because of lack of capacity, and how do you think the media can improve its reporting? Okay.
Yeah, very fantastic. Yes, validly so, and quite true. You can't engage what you are not aware of, and what it might be before you, but you can't, if you don't know what to look out for, you won't be able to really engage as you should. And that's part of why, we have trained and we are still training journalists. That's why we have been able to engage even policymakers. We've been able to engage researchers. We've been able to engage scholars, because it's a pipeline you have to continue to build and invest in. It's not just a one-off thing. And I always like to say that all these interventions, whether we like it or not, are not a sprint. They are a marathon. So you might see shifts here and there. Of course, everybody wants to see the massive change. But we keep moving one day at a time, one person at a time. So the ability to enable or equip journalists with the skills and tools and techniques they need to be able to trace financial flows, which is very important, to be able to tell stories that reflect on climate justice, because some of the climate actions, really, for example, or the climate solutions, so to say, when you're talking about carbon markets, right? How just and equitable is it? How are you able to tell stories that say a company that is based in the United States or in the UK has acquired acres of land so that it remains green, right? And it doesn't mean they are reducing their emissions. It just gives them permission to continue emitting because they have money. That's not fair. So that's part of the conversations that we need to train journalists on so that they are able to use different tools and techniques, satellite imagery, open source intelligence, and so on and so forth, to report better and holistically.
Thank you so much, Adeolu, for that. So I'm going to take the next question to Dr. Mike. And the question is also going to flow from what Adeolu said. You are a civil society person, and I know your organization has worked extensively with communities to amplify their voices. So as a civil society person, how do you think CSOs can work collaboratively with the media to amplify all of these climate change issues?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I was at the COP. So I returned just 2 days ago. I felt disappointed with the outcome, just like every serious civil society person would be. Yes, the conversation that was held earlier already gave insight into what we are not doing, and that is the demand side of it. And for us to demand, we need to work closely together. It is very easy for the global north countries to divide the global south because we are not united. And this played out at the COP even this year on the issues of adaptation and indicators. You know, so it's interesting. I know there was someone here from Senegal. Senegal somehow joined the Arab states that are holding very strong to their fossil fuels because they also just discovered oil and they don't want, you know, to miss the opportunity of benefiting from, in quotes, the benefit of oil. You know, so, but the fact is that, my colleague rightly said, there must be a transition. There will be a phase out. Now, when we say phase out, it doesn't mean that tomorrow we will stop using fossil fuels. But what the COP missed, the missed opportunity was the global mechanism for a just transition. For us in Africa, we don't even have emissions. What we have is emissions to avoid, which means we must develop. We must grow our economy. And in doing this, there will be emissions. But so far, it is very minimal. So how do we now avoid those emissions as we grow, right? So the civil societies need to work very closely together. And for me, one of the biggest opportunities that I think we are missing as a continent in Africa is the dash for the transition minerals that we have in our continent. So energy transition is already happening. Companies are dashing to Africa to take lithium, to take copper, to take cobalt, to produce solar panels, to produce batteries, and send back to us in Africa to buy. Why are we not taking the opportunity of God-blessed minerals, you know, to take care of ourselves, to negotiate better than going to COP with more like a cup in hand to go and beg? So the fact is, civil society organizations, even all of us here, must work very close together so that from the demand side, we will demand for transparency and accountability, even for some of the little resources that we have received. We cry that we don't have the resources, adaptation funds and all. Nigeria really has not benefited from some of the climate funds. I think this is the very first time that Nigeria will benefit from the Global Climate Fund. It has not come. It is Lagos State, you know, coming up with something on shoreline protection. The Global Environment Facility Funds and all the others. What have we done with what we have so far? It's not just Nigeria. It's also extending to my brother here in Ghana. And all the resources they are stealing from Atewa Forest and taking to China to go and do all of this. But the good news, I'm happy when I saw that he's from Ghana. the new head of the AGN is a Ghanaian, and I hope that we'll take and make the best use of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mike. So you mentioned something very important, and that is to say that the problem is not just peculiar to Nigeria. I've been in several conversations where we have several countries from the continent, and then they talk about their challenges, and you found out that all of these problems are similar. Now, to you, Gideon, when we talk about laws, we have policies, we have laws around climate change. Ghana most countries are updating their nationally determined contributions. I'm glad you worked on one of our reports recently on the NDCs in Ghana. So when we talk about this, there's usually that conversation about weak enforcement. Why we say we have laws, there's usually that implementation issue. And so, which has also been a key reason for resource exploitation and environmental injustice. So what strategies or innovations in regulatory enforcement can ensure compliance without stifling local livelihoods? We are going green, right? And we know that there are some people whose livelihoods depend on the fossil fuel. If you go to our communities now, you still have women using firewood. And then we're trying to let them know that this is not healthy for our environment. They need to move. And now in our transiting to renewable energy, how do we ensure this does not negatively impact the same people that we are trying to ensure that they also have a better living?
Thank you very much. So yeah, you cannot have policies and then not enforce them. So enforcement is very key, but often than not, what we see is weak enforcement due to several factors: policy, the gap between policy and implementation, corruption, clientelism, vested interest, inadequate resources, etc., etc. Now, beyond that, what strategies can we use? Okay, so I think that number one, I would talk about involving communities. And then I would give an example. When you have a policy and then you involve communities as part of the policy development, implementation, and then enforcement, you are much more likely to have successes. In Ghana, we have what we call the CRIMA, that is the Community Resource Management of Forest. And then with this, there was recently a law has been passed, but before it started, the district municipal assemblies passed a bylaw. And then they were saying that you have these forests there, do not let anyone go in there. And then it was because of illegal logging and flora and fauna crimes, etc. Now, because we want you to help us in ensuring that nobody goes there, this place is going to be used for ecotourism. And then we are going to give you at least 60% of the revenues which come to your local community. The people were happy, yeah. Apart from that, as part of the forest and then all that, the place was growing share trees and then all that. What we are going to do is that we are going to provide for you processing plants for the share. If you are able to protect these places, the people were happy, excited. Now, in about 4 or 5 years of implementation, illegal logging in those communities reduced by 60%. And then academic studies, of which one of them have been involved, showed that in those communities who were involved in enforcement, their food security levels have gone higher than communities who have not been involved in enforcement. So the point here is that let us involve communities in enforcement, and then we are much more likely to have some successes. The issue about technology, let me drill down to a study that I was also involved in. All of you, you know about the issues about irresponsible mining in Ghana, Galamsey, and then all that. So in a study that I was involved in, what we observed was that we used remote sensing, satellite technologies, and then all that. And then we took some images of irresponsibly mined areas over a period of time. Now, just by doing a change detection, we discovered the forest losses and then all that. And then we were able to predict that usually people who want to engage in irresponsible mining usually would want to mine along riverbanks. So through modeling, we were able to predict that if that is what the data shows us, then future law enforcement should be along riverbanks. You cannot have law enforcement officers everywhere. You cannot have regulatory agencies everywhere. Because they are limited, they should be targeted. That is what technology is doing for us. Okay? Good. Also, with Ghana's Minerals Commission, in the course of the study, we realized that they had a control room, which is recent. Now, what happens is that when excavators come in, excavators can cause serious environmental challenges when they are used in mining, deforestation, and then all that. So every excavator which comes in is tracked. And then because the excavator is tracked, the movement of excavators are monitored in a control room. So if you are saying that your excavator is going to be used for road construction, where are you constructing? It is put in the system and then all that. Now, excavators which move beyond its jurisdiction, when it moves beyond the jurisdiction, the system is able to shut down the excavator. This is a pilot thing. It is able to shut it down. And then you would have to call Accra. Accra would have to call the district Minerals Commission office, and then they have to go there to find out where it stopped. And then if it is near a concession or it was used for mining, then you have yourself to be blamed. This is something that has been piloted and then it's working. So again, we can also leverage on technology in order to ensure that, enforcement of laws become effective. And then the last thing that I would also want to say is that in most countries, there are specialized courts, right, that are dealing with finance issues, that are dealing with et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things that in Ghana was introduced was setting up of special environmental courts. What happened was that usually when you have law enforcement agencies, they go, they do the arrest, they become discouraged because maybe due to some political reasons and then all that, people are not prosecuted. And then sometimes destructive issues climate can be a little bit technical. You need, some form of specialized knowledge to be able to deal with it. Journalists may not want to report on destructive, for instance, because there can be a lot of jargons in there. So the attention is that let's have these specialized environmental courts, and then let us see how we can provide capacity to the judges. And then because they are specialized, they can fast track prosecution and sentencing and then all that. So these are the three things that I would want to comment on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gideon. I believe that inclusion is really key to strengthen our policies, and there's actually a lot to learn from ourselves as a people. So back to you, Timothy. When we talk about climate change, we cannot separate this conversation from the solid mineral sector, because whatever we need to move into the renewable energy is from the solid mineral sector, our lithium and all of those. And we have people who are directly impacted by resource extraction, and these are the communities. Gideon mentioned, every other person has mentioned it today. So I would like to ask you, how can, when you look at the Niger Delta today, we can tell of the impact of that resource extraction, how their land has been degraded, the oil spill and everything. Now we are moving to the solid mineral sector. As Africans, how can we avoid repeating the historical mistakes of of the extractive industries? And what frameworks are needed to ensure that mineral development protects host communities and prevent environmental harm and also delivers real economic value?
Okay, thank you very much. Very important question, very important. Let me start with the last framework. Host country framework, where we give ownership, recognizing the host community, maybe host country, the host community, the framework that gives them that free, pure consent information. Okay, let me break it down. If in my decade of environmental impact assessment, we always understand that you can't manage or even monitor what you can measure. If you want the community suddenly to be part of the co-implementers, or maybe you have an enforcement, you have a policy and you want part of the enforcement, the community should be involved, then the community should be part of the decision makers. If the community is missing on that table where those decisions are made, and maybe you call for a stakeholders engagement, and then you say the communities we are part of the stakeholders engage, and then you now make the decision behind the community after the whole ceremonial stakeholders engagement, and then these decisions are made. It's going to be difficult for such kind of policies to be implemented, especially when you look at community engagement. So, bottom-up approach is one of the key frameworks to begin to loop in. We need to start to mainstream, integrate, prioritize issues from the bottom-up approach. I mean, you need to listen to the community. You need not just their voices. We need to come to the place where, for example, you mentioned how we've done with the oil sector and the consequence in the Niger Delta. Now, we're looking at the extractive industry. The same picture is facing us now because we are looking at the socioeconomic livelihood of the people. So if you don't consider the socioeconomic livelihood of the people, there is no provision of alternatives, you don't consider their welfare or well-being, but you have policies, very good policies. You know, I'm back from COP, and then, you know, we have the Climate Change Act, and then we have policies, and the minister says no more mineral extractions and all that. In fact, foreign people go. The people will come together and even sell those minerals. They will extract it themselves and sell it themselves. Even if you say, foreigners, please stop extracting from us and all that. They will do it by themselves. They will find a way to do it. So it boils down to having that bottom-up approach, I repeat, where you have a framework that considers the host community first, their decisions, you contact them, you consider their responses, consent is important. So in summary, it is about the people. And if the policy, whatever implementation of it that we are trying to loop it into the extractive industry, have to be productive or effective, it must come from the table where we sit in opposite direction with the people and we have an agreement so that the people can take ownership of it and be part of the implementation. That's when it's effective.
All right, thank you so much. It still boils down to inclusion. Now to you, Adeolu. In a landscape where misinformation thrives, how can the media expose systemic corruption and policy failures that undermine environmental governance, and how can they do so safely and effectively?
Wow. Okay. So the issue around misinformation, especially climate misinformation, has gone on a trajectory, has different curves. At some point, it was more about climate denialism, like it's not true, it's a lie. But science has proven to us over and over again that this is the reality on ground. Now, what we are seeing is climate obstruction, which is part of what we have seen happen at COP. You have lobbyist organizations, you know, going to COP. Even I think the PR agency that was working for the COP was heavily invested in a fossil fuel company. So they are enablers. You have researchers, you have universities, you have PR companies that are bankrolled by the fossil fuel industry. So it's a web, sort of. And so that's why the things around misinformation is it's not only about the fact that whether climate change is real or not, or whether the impacts are real or not. It is more about economic control and power. And that's the fact. And so with the media's role as holding power to account, again, the media has a very crucial role to play. And that's why even with the intervention we have had within Africa, Latin America, and in some cases South Asia, when we were implementing the Open Climate Reporting Initiative, we had pushbacks from authorities. So we had a partner in Cameroon who was supposed to organize trainings for journalists in Cameroon and Gabon. And a trainer, so there was a training in Cameroon, then another training in Gabon. A trainer was flying, who is an investigative journalist anyway, was flying from Cameroon to Gabon, but then she was held up in the airport for about 24 hours. That was in 2023, if I'm not wrong. Essentially, Gabon was supposed to have their elections around August, and the training was around March. And she was held up in the airport basically because of the elections that was going to happen in August. And the security operatives said they don't want any investigative journalists to come and do anything funny. But she said she was here for a training and all that. Long story short, she had to go back to Cameroon, and she couldn't go into Gabon. So we had to bring the people to be trained from Gabon to Cameroon. The same scenario also played out in Latin America during the workshops we had last year. A participant flew from, I think, from Peru to Colombia. He was held up at the airport, and then he was sent back. And so journalists are also facing some of these things. So it is one thing for you to provide the resources for journalists. It is one thing for you to train or want to train the journalist. But the journalists are being blocked from even being trained, right? So those are some of the things that are the realities. So you want to get trained to be able to report equity, justice, climate misinformation, and all that. But even your safety is compromised. Oh, we even also had a situation. And these are very real scenarios. And that's what I try to tell journalists that I interact with. There is nothing that is happening to a journalist in Nigeria, Ghana, that is not happening to a journalist in Brazil, Peru, or a journalist in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh from the experience I've been able to have in the past 4 years. We had trainings for the last COP at UAE, or the penultimate one rather, at UAE, we had a partner that was working in the region, and all her security assets were compromised by the powers that be, right? Because we were doing reports on covering COP in the UAE because we were working in the Middle East and North Africa. So these are realities that journalists are facing. But what we usually say, and what we've incorporated into the trainings that we do is safety first, safety second, safety third. No story is worth the life of a journalist. And so you have to put in place, digital security techniques and frameworks to ensure that, number one, you are digitally protected. Number two, you are physically protected. Number three, you are emotionally protected, because we are also seeing that sometimes journalists go through a lot to be able to tell some of these stories, and they need to detox, so to say. They need to de-escalate some of the things that they've seen. They need to be able to step back a little bit. And these are some of the things that we encourage media organizations to do. In cases where media organizations are not able to do it because they are also facing sustainability issues, there are media development organizations, even CGID, that helps provide some of those things so that journalists they have all they need to be able to tackle some of these scourges, whether safety, digital protection, online abuses and trolling, and even climate misinformation. So essentially, in a nutshell, I think what we need to do more is to continue to amplify these issues. Sometimes it can just get tiring, I know, been there, done that, but we can't relent, right, in doing what we should do if we want to see the kind of change and development that we want to see in our country and our region.
Thank you so much, Adielu. Of course, we cannot relent. And for the media to do its job properly, it has to be truly independent. Thank you so much. Now, Dr. Mike, when we talk about civil society organizations, basically what comes to mind is, advocacy. Now, beyond advocacy, what are the most effective strategies for CSOs to empower citizens to actively participate in implementation of nationally determined contributions?
I wish I was a government official because, of course, the NDCs should be our NDCs. But the way it is now, it is Nigeria NDCs at the top. It is not the state's NDCs, right? So, but when you look at the gaps, where are the people? They are in the states. The impact of climate change is local. So it should actually have been a bottom-up approach in developing our NDCs 3.0, like our French said. But as it is, we do not have a choice than to support the government to ensure that people understand the NDCs and their roles. And for me, who are the very first persons that should understand the NDCs? It is the state governments. Yes. Because, yes, NCCC is at the federal level. All attention is at the federal level. But where we really need that work done, building resilience for communities to adapt to climate change, is very local. So the question is, how much do state governors budget for climate resilience? I know local government is nearly dead in most states, so let's start with it. But then, as civil society organizations, we will continue to engage and to mobilize communities to build resilience. And in doing this, we don't have a choice than to continually inform communities on the dangers of allowing some companies to mine in their communities, to carry out projects in their communities. I'm bringing this because of the danger the country is facing. Climate resilience, the number one impact for me as an individual is food, food security. Now, a lot of the mining operations are impacting on all arable lands. Now, look at the situation we are with food security. Our population by 2050, which is less than 15 years, will be 400 million persons. Yes, we are 230 million today. We are struggling to feed ourselves. We are importing food. We go back to the power and economic control that the guys in the global north want. This is what they want. We shouldn't be able to feed ourselves. We will sell the crude oil and use the forex to import food, like it's happening in some other countries. You go to Kenya, I don't know if you have friends here in Kenya, they rather support farmers in Kenya to grow flowers. Do we eat flowers? No. They export all the flowers. Go to Kenya every evening, you see all the flights going to the Netherlands and all, they move flowers out. So what do? They use the forex to import grains for their country. For us in Nigeria and in West Africa, we are still in control a little bit of our food security, in quote, our food system. We still have those natural ones. So, but the fact is that our communities are slowly losing it. And this is where we as civil society organizations need to focus and sensitize our people on the need to hold on to our food systems. Now, to end it, I will say that there's a popular, what do I call her? She was one of the surviving slaves in the US, right? And she had a quote, Audre Lorde, that's her name. And I know that all of you know this quote. The master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. That is the situation that we in Africa are. And what is the master's tools? It is exploitation. It is power capture. It is profit over people. It is profit over the environment. So what are the tools that we should use as CSOs to dismantle these master's tools? We continue to call for openness. We continue to call for fairness. We continue to call for accountability and transparency. And that is what we need to do. We just need to keep singing it like never ending. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I'm so tempted to ask a follow-up question, but I've been getting signals that our time is up. So, but then we'll take it to the audience. We ask maybe we take one or two questions from people. Okay, we can just take 2 questions, right? Okay, or can we do one, and 3 questions? Thank you. Oh, that's fine.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you for CJID for being inclusive of persons with disability in this summit. My name is Abibat Yusuf. My question goes to the panelists. How can the government and the international organization ensure that the climate and environmental funding are inclusive of persons with disability?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So who's going to take that question? Should we?
I think we should take all of the questions,
okay,
and then we'll have the responses.
Can we have a man here? Let's just balance the gender. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Akbarere Justina Mojeve. I'm a film archivist, and I just want to buttress some of the points raised. When the speakers were mentioning green gas exchange, I was just saying it's actually more than that, because, and I just want to appreciate our brother from Ghana and the other brother that talked about food security. In 2017, I actually did a research on climate change and the ecological response of plankton as bioindicator of climate change. And my lecturer said, nothing like climate change. Can you change it to climate variability? I changed it to climate variability. And from the images, because I actually use GIS, water body, my background is zoology. So, and from the images of 1986, 2013, 2017, you can see changes in the water body. I did it in OAU. Great, you can see the water body closing up from the imagery. So there is actually climate change. And then to our journalists, how can you report this? Please, you have to identify the actors. Like you said, Adiolu said that is a web. You identify the actors. You identify those that need the justice, because it's not just humans. And it's affecting not just humans, it's affecting our food security. When we talk about planting, they are the down part of our food chain, plankton. If they are affected, our food supply will be affected. So please, it's actually a gold mine. This topic is a gold mine for journalists to do research and report. And also, our community, just like we said, they need to be educated. Because this thing goes beyond just companies. Absolutely. Our local communities are also actually they are contributing to this climate change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that contribution. The last person here. Yes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Dr. Jacob Shagbao Swemo, the head, Department of Mass Communication, Nile University of Nigeria, Abuja. I have 3. I'll make them very brief. One, these are very interesting conversations. How do we translate this into a policy framework that addresses this issue specifically, so that the interesting conversations are not limited within this hall and just among ourselves. I heard one of the panelists struggling to say he wished he was a politician or a government representative, because it is very important we look at that issue. The other one is the fact that there seems to be an information deficit, awareness on climate change and environmental justice across African communities. What can be done to increase awareness about climate change, understanding the multilingual nature of our African communities, especially in Nigeria? Because we're talking about starting from bottom up, and it would interest you to know that majority of our local dwellers are not aware of the dangers of climate change, what it portends, the implications on food security and all that, and then environmental justice. What kind of communication approach or strategy are we proposing to ensure that they're fully integrated? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So there are two questions here, and the first is on inclusion. How can we make climate policies inclusive? I don't know who's going to take that. Dr. Mike? Okay, great.
Thank you. I was amazed at the question from our sister persons with disability. And I was even amazed more at the interpreter, how he got her name, with the sign language. And yes, so there is a policy, the National Gender Policy on Climate Change, which actually captures persons with disabilities in it. I know a few organizations like the CBM Global are working directly with persons with disabilities on issues of climate change. And not leaving out my organization as well, we have an initiative called Food for Persons with Disabilities, where we actually train persons with disabilities to grow food, and all. So, yes, the attention, when we say leave no one behind, it is everyone, right? So persons with disabilities also suffer the consequences of climate change. I have one short example to share. We worked with the Nasarawa state government to support them develop a climate policy. And during the stakeholders engagement, a person with a disability was there. She was on a wheelchair, and she shared that climate change impacts her. So the House of Assembly member there was like, how? You on a wheelchair? And she said the last time it flooded, she could not access her house for 2 days because she is on a wheelchair. While the other able persons were able to jump and maneuver their way, she was not able to. So climate change actually impacts persons with disabilities even more. So they must be included. So it must go beyond policy, right? To the implementation of these policies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mike. So the next question is to Adeolu, and it's on information deficit. Yeah. So what can we do to increase awareness on climate change?
I mean, simple. We keep talking about it over and over again. We might sound like broken records, thank you. We might sound like a broken record, but we can't just stop. And I think it's very important to establish from what you also said about how everything is connected. In fact, one of the biggest issues that is facing us as a country today is also connected to climate change. Insecurity, the Lake Chad Basin shrinking over the years. And so, again, if the source of, income or economic opportunities for some people has shrunk over a period of time, and there was no adequate planning. Remember, we were under military rule for most of those years. And so, nobody gave a hoot anyway. So it then meant that by the time we have moved to democracy and we are now in a situation where things have gone from bad to worse, and you have people migrating from where they are, which is another consequence of climate change, people, human beings, will always move from one place to another, quote and unquote, from a green pasture to a greener pasture. So it is what it is. And so I think it's very important that we keep talking about it and the interconnectedness, talking about biodiversity, how the ocean and the fish bodies have been affected, how people's communities have been degraded, and so on and so forth. And in talking about implementation of policies, I would also speak to that based on the work that we have done with CJID. For example, one of the things that we were able to do with CJID was to develop a COP reporting handbook for journalists. I like to call it COP reporting for dummies, because again, the climate change conversation can be up here. Greenhouse emission, mitigation, adaptation, and you're like, I'm overwhelmed. So you need to learn to, what are these terminologies? Because it's a science concept to start with. And so you have to be able to understand the science, understand the international governance structure, and then you can now build on that to localize it to the communities. What does adaptation mean to a community in Ekiti State, in Ikare Ekiti and all that, or in the Niger Delta? We also did a training last year with CJID, and we commissioned about 11 investigative stories that were published that are across the West African sub-region that touched on different themes of climate change, the extractive, and so on and so forth. And CJID used some of those investigations to develop a policy brief that is now like a form of policy paper that will be used to engage further. And so it shows that it's an ecosystem that we have to build. Academia, journalists, researchers, and community and CSOs, community-based organizations and CSOs. That way, we are intervening and bringing about not just speaking English, but we are bringing about practicalities in communities, and we can see the change that we want to see. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adeolu, and I totally agree with you that when it comes to climate change, when it comes to information on climate change, the role of the media cannot be underplayed. We've commissioned several journalists to do a lot of investigative reporting on climate change issues, and I think it's very important as well for the media to understand that the way you communicate all of these issues to the public matters. We have the different categories of audiences that we have. The way you send a message or you communicate a message to a local woman or the people in the community is different from the kind of message you're also writing for a policymaker or for the regulators and all of those things. So, and on this note, I would like to say a big thank you to my panelists for sharing your thoughts on this issue, and to my audience, thank you so much for listening.